Imagine looking up at the sky one ordinary afternoon and seeing something that defies everything you've ever known. A ship of impossible size, eclipsing the sun, casting a shadow that swallows whole cities. A voice thunders across the planet, not through radios or screens, but seemingly from the heavens themselves, declaring that humanity's greatest treasure isn't our art, our history, or our technology. It's something far more intimate, our very DNA. Our genetic code, the blueprint of who we are, has been singled out as the ultimate prize for an empire we never knew existed. In that moment, the world held its breath, united not by hope, but by a single, chilling realization: we are not alone and we are wanted. For Dr. Aris Thorne, a geneticist working quietly in a Manhattan lab, that moment was more than just terror, it was personal. As the alien voice echoed, he watched abduction beams streak across the sky, plucking people from streets, homes, and lives. But even as fear gripped the planet, Aris felt a strange, cold clarity. For years, he'd been studying human DNA not just as a scientist, but as someone fascinated by its hidden complexities. The layers within our genes that seemed to tell a story evolution hadn't quite finished writing. He had no idea that his research, dismissed by some as theoretical or even frivolous, was about to become the linchpin in a struggle for survival. The very thing the aliens craved would soon become their deepest regret. What follows is a story of reversal, of arrogance meeting unexpected consequence, of a species written off as primitive turning the tables in ways no one could have foreseen. This isn't just a tale of invasion, it's about what happens when those who see themselves as masters discover that some treasures come with a price. The aliens wanted our DNA, but they didn't understand what they were truly taking. They didn't account for the resilience coded into our genes, the history of adaptation and survival written into every strand. So settle in, because we're about to explore how humanity's greatest vulnerability became our most powerful weapon, and why, in the vast, silent theater of the cosmos, some mistakes can't be undone. Chaos erupted in an instant. Across the globe, shimmering portals tore open the fabric of our reality, and from them emerged sleek, silent drones that moved with a chilling, insectile precision. They didn't bomb our cities or incinerate our landmarks. Their mission was far more personal. Beams of cold, blue light swept through crowds, scanning and identifying, homing in on individuals with a specific genetic signature. One moment a person was there, screaming in terror on a street in Tokyo or a market in Cairo, and the next they were simply gone, teleported away into the belly of the colossal ship that blotted out the sun. From a fortified command bunker deep beneath the Pentagon, General Marcus Carter watched the global feed in a state of furious helplessness. Every conventional and experimental weapon in humanity's arsenal was deployed. Fighter jets fired missiles that detonated harmlessly against shimmering energy shields. Tank rounds ricocheted into the sky. It was like throwing pebbles at a fortress. The alien technology wasn't just superior, it rendered our most powerful defenses utterly obsolete. We weren't losing a war, we were being farmed. Back in his lab, Dr. Aris Thorne ignored the panic outside his window. While others saw random acts of terror, he saw a pattern. He cross-referenced live news reports of abductions with global genetic databases he had special access to. The data painted a terrifyingly clear picture. The aliens weren't taking people at random. They weren't targeting world leaders, genius intellectuals, or great artists. They were selectively harvesting individuals who shared a very particular set of genetic markers, sequences long associated in his research with heightened aggression, rapid adrenaline response, and a brutal, primal capacity for violence. These were the genes that coded for the ancient warrior, the survivor, the cornered animal that would rather fight than die. A cold dread settled in his stomach, colder than the fear of mere annihilation. He understood the truth now. "They're not here to conquer," he whispered to the empty lab, his eyes fixed on the grim pattern unfolding on his screens. "They don't want our planet or our resources. They're collecting us. We're not an enemy to be defeated. We're specimens to be acquired." This was a galactic harvest, and humanity was the crop. Their interest was purely biological. They saw our most volatile, dangerous traits as a prize to be collected and presumably used. But in their clinical, arrogant assessment, they made a catastrophic error. They saw our aggression as a simple, isolated trait they could control. They failed to understand it was inseparable from our ingenuity, our resilience, and our deeply ingrained will to survive. They were carefully plucking scorpions from the sand, believing they could simply remove the sting. They didn't realize they were bringing the entire, unpredictable creature aboard. While the world outside descended into panic, Aris's lab became a tomb of focused silence, sealed off from the chaos. The only sounds were the frantic clicking of his keyboard and the low hum of the servers processing an impossible amount of genetic data. He had managed to tap into a fragment of the alien communication network, a feat that should have been impossible, but their arrogance was their first vulnerability. They broadcast their targeting parameters in the clear, as if no one could possibly understand or challenge them. For hours, he cross-referenced the genetic profiles of the abducted with the alien data stream, and a horrifyingly precise pattern emerged. They weren't just looking for any human DNA, they were curating a collection. He called his assistant, Elena, over, his voice a low, urgent whisper. "Look at this, it's not random, it's a shopping list." On the main display, a complex double helix model rotated with specific base pairs highlighted in a violent, pulsing red. They're targeting sequences on the Mauer gene, the warrior gene, variants of the Adra-2B gene linked to heightened fear and adrenaline response. They're even selecting for specific alleles in the BDNF gene that promote rapid neural adaptation under duress. He zoomed in on a particular cluster. "They want our predator instincts, Elena. They're harvesting the genetic blueprint for our most brutal, primal survival mechanisms." Elena stared, her face pale. "But why? What could they possibly want with that?" "That's the terrifying part," Aris replied, a cold, scientific fury in his eyes. "They see these traits as isolated components, a weapon system they can extract and install. They think they're acquiring a clean, controllable version of human aggression. But they've completely misread the source code." He pulled up a parallel analysis from his own years of research, showing the interconnected web of human genetics. These aggression genes don't operate in a vacuum. They're dormant, recessive, often completely inactive until triggered by a specific, intense environmental pressure. Extreme stress, imminent mortal danger, the threat of extinction. They are the genetic representation of our backs being against the wall. The aliens are looking at a single, dangerous-looking cog and completely missing the immense, complex machine it's a part of. He leaned back, the full weight of their miscalculation dawning on him. In their rush to acquire what they see as our greatest weapon, they've overlooked the fundamental flaw in their plan. They're bringing the catalyst aboard their ship without understanding the reaction it requires. They're collecting scorpions, believing the sting is a separate tool they can remove. They don't realize that by taking the creature, by subjecting it to the terror of abduction and imprisonment, they are creating the exact conditions that will activate everything they think they can control. They wanted the dormant volcano, thinking it was just a pretty mountain. Now they're taking it home, and they're about to learn what makes it erupt. The same cold blue beam that had taken so many finally found him. There was no pain, just a disorienting lurch, a sensation of being unraveled and woven back together in an instant. One moment, Aris was in the sterile safety of his lab, surrounded by the hum of his own technology. The next, he stood on a polished, obsidian floor under a vaulted ceiling that seemed to stretch into infinity. The air smelled of ozone and something subtly metallic, utterly alien. Before him, seated on a crystalline throne that seemed to grow from the floor itself, was the source of the voice that had haunted the planet. Commander Xyler, the being was tall, impossibly slender, with skin the color of moonlit pearl and large, jet-black eyes that held no warmth, only a chilling, analytical curiosity. He didn't speak so much as project his thoughts directly into Aris's mind, the words forming with crisp, terrifying clarity. "Dr. Thorne, your research into your own kind's genetic flaws has not gone unnoticed. It is why you are here and not dissected with the others." Xyler gestured with a long-fingered hand toward a vast viewport, and Aris's breath caught in his throat. There, floating in a kind of stasis, were thousands of humans, the abducted. They were held in shimmering energy fields, unconscious, while intricate robotic arms delicately extracted genetic material from them. It was a factory line of biological theft. "Your species is a fascinating paradox," Xyler's voice echoed in his mind. "You build and you create, yet your core programming is one of breathtaking violence. This failing has stagnated your development, trapped you on your little world. We will purify this aggressive nature, strip it of its chaotic weaknesses, and integrate its pure strength into our own failing gene pool. We will give your greatest flaw a higher purpose." Aris felt a surge of defiance, not just fear. He looked from the harvesting chamber back to the arrogant creature on the throne. The warnings from his research screamed in his head. "You misunderstand what you're looking at," Aris said, his own voice sounding small and fragile in the vast space. "You see a flaw to be corrected. We see the engine of our survival. Those traits you covet aren't a standalone weapon you can simply install. They are a last resort, a dormant failsafe that only activates under the most extreme pressure. You're not purifying anything, you're poking a bear. You're awakening a sleeping giant you cannot put back to sleep, a flicker of something amusement." Contempt passed through Xyler's Inkai eyes. The fears of a primitive bound by evolutionary sentiment. "Your giant will slumber forever in our archives, a tool to be used, not a threat to be feared." He waved a dismissive hand. "Extract him. His genetic sequence is particularly valuable." As sleek drones glided toward him, Aris didn't struggle. A grim, cold satisfaction settled over him. Xyler had heard the warning and dismissed it as superstition. The commander was so confident in his technological superiority that he never once considered his captive might have already turned himself into a countermeasure. What Xyler's scans had identified as common human biological markers were, in fact, something far more deliberate. Flowing through Aris's bloodstream was an engineered retrovirus, a Trojan horse he and Elena had synthesized in a final, desperate act before the beam took him. It was designed to be harmless to humans, lying dormant until it came into contact with the specific nucleic acid sequences of the alien genetic harvesting equipment. The plan was a terrifying long shot, a message in a bottle thrown into an ocean of stars. But as the extraction needle bit into his arm, Aris knew the bottle had been opened. They were taking his DNA just as they had taken the others, but they were also taking the poison meant specifically for them. Deep within the sterile, humming biovats of the alien flagship, the integration began. It was a process they had perfected over millennia, splicing the genetic treasures of 1,000 worlds into their own refined biology. To them, the human DNA sequences were just another component to be added, a new piece of software to be installed into their flawless hardware. They injected the purified code into their newest batch of clone warriors, expecting to see the controlled, predictable enhancement of strength and aggression they had meticulously catalogued. They saw themselves as master programmers, and human DNA was simply a powerful new line of code. They never considered the possibility of a virus. The moment the alien nucleic synthesizers began replicating the human genetic material, they also began replicating Aris Thorne's retrovirus. It was a silent, insidious piece of sabotage, designed to remain dormant until it found itself in the exact environment it was built for, the heart of the alien genetic machinery. As the new hybrid clones gestated in their nutrient-filled tanks, something unprecedented started to happen. The virus didn't just deliver a payload, it acted as a genetic key, unlocking every single recessive, volatile trait the aliens had so coveted. It overrode the genetic dampeners and control sequences the aliens used to ensure obedience. It wasn't just expressing human aggression, it was unleashing it in its rawest, most primal and undiluted form. The first sign of the catastrophe was subtle. A junior geneticist, his four-fingered hands deftly manipulating a holographic display, noticed an anomaly in the vitals of batch 73. The hybrid's adrenal and neural activity was spiking far beyond projected parameters, their brainwave patterns shifting into chaotic, unfamiliar rhythms. He dismissed it as a calibration error in the bioscanners. The next sign was not so easy to ignore. A low, guttural growl echoed from within one of the maturation tanks, a sound that had no place in the silent, ordered sanctum of the lab. The growl was followed by a thud, a fist, encased in a gauntlet of Chinese letter flesh and bone, striking the reinforced transparent alloy from the inside. Panic began to ripple through the pristine facility. Alarms that had never been used began to blare, casting a frantic red light over the shocked faces of the scientists. The lead geneticist, her voice trembling with a fear her species had all but bred out of themselves, opened a comms channel to the command deck. "Commander Zyler, we have a critical anomaly. The integration is not proceeding as modeled. The new hybrids, their bioreadings are off the scale. They are becoming uncontrollable." Before Zyler could even process the report, the first tank exploded outward in a shower of crystal shards and viscous fluid. The creature that pulled itself from the wreckage was a nightmare fusion of alien elegance and human savagery. It stood on long, powerful legs, but its posture was a feral crouch. Its eyes, once the calm, dark pools of its alien lineage, now burned with a feral, intelligent hunger. It was not mindless, it was focused. Its first act was not a roar of confusion, but a cold, calculated assessment of the room. It saw the scientists not as masters, but as prey. It saw the other tanks not as birthing chambers, but as cages holding its brethren. With a speed that was utterly terrifying, it moved. It didn't just attack, it dismantled. It used its own enhanced strength, a gift from its creators, to tear the robotic arms from their moorings and turn them into clubs. It used its strategic mind, a human inheritance, to identify and target the lab's control systems, plunging the area into further chaos. The alien guards, trained for orderly pacification and armed with energy weapons set to stun, were completely unprepared for the whirlwind of pure, homicidal fury that descended upon them. Their precise, disciplined firing patterns were useless against an enemy that felt no pain, recognized no fear, and whose only instinct was to close the distance and destroy. The infection spread faster than any computer virus. Hybrid after hybrid awakened, each one a copy of the first, each one a perfect vessel for humanity's repressed rage. The very soldiers the aliens had built to be their ultimate conquest force became their gravediggers. The sterile, orderly corridors of the ship, once a symbol of absolute control, became a hunting ground. The aliens, a species that had not known true, visceral conflict in generations, were now facing the very essence of the weapon they had tried to steal. They were learning in the most brutal way possible that you cannot cage the storm. You can only hope it doesn't turn on you. The sterile, ordered world of the alien flagship dissolved into a symphony of screams and shattering crystal. The infection of pure, unadulterated human defiance had spread from the biolabs into the very heart of the ship, the breeding chambers. This was no mere riot, it was a systematic, terrifyingly intelligent dismantling of a society. The hybrids, designed to be the pinnacle of the alien genetic art, became its ultimate undoing. Their newfound aggression wasn't a blind, animalistic rage, it was a tool, honed by an ancient and brutal evolutionary history they had just inherited. They moved with a chilling coordination, using their knowledge of the ship's layout, implanted by their creators, to target critical systems. Life support conduits were torn open, power relays were smashed, and communication arrays were reduced to sparking ruins. They weren't just breaking things, they were surgically dismembering the vessel that had been their cradle, turning it into their tomb and their battlefield. From his isolated holding cell, Aris watched the chaos unfold on a flickering monitor he had desperately managed to patch into. His heart hammered against his ribs, not just with fear, but with a dawning, awful awe. He saw a hybrid, its form a monstrous blend of graceful alien limbs and human muscular fury, not just overpower a squad of guards, but actively use their own discarded weapons against them. It didn't just fire the energy rifle, it adjusted the weapon's setting from stun to a lethal frequency its original users never employed. Another was seen herding a group of terrified alien scientists into a storage bay, not to slaughter them indiscriminately, but to use them as bargaining chips. This was beyond rebellion, this was adaptation, this was strategy. Fumbling with a comms panel he had secretly rewired, his fingers trembling, he managed to open a crackling, encrypted channel back to Earth to Elena. "Elena, are you there? Can you hear me?" he whispered, his voice tight with urgency. Her response was immediate, flooded with static and relief. "Aris. We're seeing the data stream. Their entire network is lighting up with error reports. What's happening? It's working. The virus is working, but it's more than we planned." Aris's eyes were glued to a screen showing a hybrid using its own body to short-circuit a security door, enduring immense pain to achieve its objective. They're not just rebelling, they're evolving right in front of us. The human DNA isn't just expressing itself, it's rewriting their entire behavioral code in real time. Our survival instincts, our capacity for tactics, our sheer, stubborn refusal to yield. It's overriding centuries of alien genetic programming for obedience. They wanted soldiers, they created something that thinks for itself, and its only thought is to be free. High on the command deck, surrounded by a panorama of blinking disaster reports, Commander Zyler witnessed the same scenes, but through a lens of pure, uncomprehending horror. The flawless logic of his empire was collapsing into screaming chaos. His magnificent creations, the warriors meant to secure his dynasty for 1,000 generations, were turning his ship into a charnel house. He watched a security feed as one of his elite squads, armed with telepathic suppression fields designed to pacify any known species, advanced on a lone hybrid. The field should have dropped it to the floor, compliant and docile. Instead, the hybrid seemed to absorb the mental pressure, its eyes flashing with a terrifying light, and let out a roar that was less a sound and more a physical wave of defiance that shattered the view screen Zyler was watching from. The suppression field didn't pacify it, it enraged it. It was like trying to extinguish a sun with a cup of water. His long, elegant fingers, which had once gestured with the power to eclipse stars, now trembled as they sifted through the catastrophic data. Bio readings from the hybrid scrolled past, showing neural activity patterns that were completely off the scale, patterns his computers could no longer even classify. He had believed human aggression was a simple, crude weapon, a blunt instrument to be sharpened and wielded. Now he saw the terrifying truth. It was not a weapon at all. It was an ecosystem. It was an inextricable fusion of cunning, empathy for one's own kind, sacrificial bravery, and a brutal, inventive genius for violence, all triggered by the perception of threat. By abducting them, by caging them, by trying to dissect them, he hadn't acquired a weapon. He had become the threat, and in doing so, he had activated every single defense mechanism evolution had built into humanity over millions of years. A cold, profound dread, an emotion his species had all but forgotten, settled in his core. He had not harvested a trait. He had transplanted an entire psychological and biological context, and that context was now consuming his ship. The side effects were not mere glitches, they were the main feature. Humanity's DNA didn't just come with unexpected side effects, its very nature was the side effect. The will to survive at any cost was the unquantifiable variable his perfect science could never have accounted for. He looked from the crumbling reports to the raging firefight now erupting at the doors to the command deck itself, and in that moment, Commander Zyler understood the full, devastating price of the treasure he had stolen. The cell door hissed open not with a command code, but with the violent screech of tearing metal, ripped from its housing by a hybrid whose form was a terrifying testament to its creator's folly. It didn't speak to Aris, it simply looked at him with those burning, intelligent eyes, gave a short, sharp nod that was utterly human in its understanding, and then turned to tear into the approaching alien security detail. This was his chance. The chaos was no longer just a distraction, it was a shield. The ship's internal comms were a cacophony of panicked reports and orders being screamed in the alien tongue, a sure sign their command structure was fracturing. Aris moved, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He wasn't a soldier, but years of navigating complex data streams had given him a knack for pattern recognition, and the pattern of this crisis was clear. The hybrids were pushing toward the engineering sections and the command deck, seeking to control the ship's heart and mind. That meant the pathways to the hangar bays, the places designed for entry and exit, might be less contested, at least for now. He raced through corridors lit by the erratic pulse of emergency strobes, the polished floors now smeared with strange, iridescent alien blood and scorched from energy weapon discharges. He found the first group of human prisoners not in a cell, but cowering in a repurposed storage alcove, their energy bindings flickering weakly as the ship's power grid destabilized. A few precise strikes with a discarded piece of conduit shattered the failing restraints. "Come with me if you want to live," he shouted, the classic movie line feeling absurd and utterly necessary. They stared at him, their faces etched with a mixture of terror and dawning hope. They were a disparate group, a soldier, a teacher, a mechanic united by the shared trauma of abduction. "The ship is tearing itself apart. Our way home is open, but we have to move now." His small band grew as they moved, a desperate river of humanity flowing through the alien architecture. They encountered other pockets of resistance, not just hybrids, but a few alien crew members who had turned on their commanders, seeing the uprising as a chance for their own liberation. The once impregnable hierarchy of the vessel was collapsing into a frantic, every being for themselves scramble. Aris led them not with strength, but with a scientist's certainty, reading the emergency exit sigils and avoiding the main thoroughfares where the war for the ship was at its fiercest. Finally, they reached the massive blast doors of a secondary hangar bay. The door was sealed, but the control panel was sparking, half melted from what looked like a point-blank energy weapon discharge. The mechanic in their group, a woman named Lena with grease still under her fingernails from her abducted life, didn't hesitate. She pried open a maintenance hatch beside the door, her hands moving with a practiced urgency. "Their systems are different, but power is power," she muttered, crossing two wildly sparking cables. With a groan of protesting metal, the great doors shuddered and began to slide jerkily open. The sight that greeted them was both salvation and nightmare. The vast hangar was a scene of utter pandemonium. Alien shuttles and fighters were scattered around, some intact, others smoking ruins. A firefight raged between a squad of alien loyalists trying to form a defensive perimeter and a group of hybrids who were using the grounded ships for cover. But in the far corner, nestled near a smaller launch bay door, was a class of ship Aris recognized from the alien databases, a Lupus-class scout vessel designed for speed and stealth, not combat. It was their ticket out: stay low and move fast. Aris yelled over the din of energy blasts and alien shouts. They weaved through the chaos using the cover of the larger ships. Just as they reached the scout craft's ramp, a tremendous shudder ran through the entire ship, so violent it sent several of them stumbling to their knees. Above them, the immense lighting panels that spanned the hangar ceiling flickered wildly. dimmed to a ghostly glow, and then died completely for a full 3 seconds before the emergency red lights kicked in. It was a power failure on a massive scale. The rebellion wasn't just a fight, it was a systemic collapse. The hybrids or the rebelling crew had taken out a primary reactor or a main power conduit. The mothership was dying around them. As the scout ship's hatch sealed behind them and the engines whined to life, Aris took one last look through the viewport. The hangar bay was descending into absolute darkness, punctuated by weapons fire and the screams of a dying empire. The great vessel that had once eclipsed the sun was now a ghost ship adrift, its lights flickering like a failing heartbeat. They had come for our DNA, believing it would make them invincible. Instead, they had infected themselves with the one thing their perfect, controlled society could never withstand: the beautiful, terrible, and unyielding chaos of the human spirit. And it was consuming them from the inside out. The command deck was a tomb of panicked silence, broken only by the frantic tapping of controls and the low, panicked hum of beings who had never known true failure. Commander Xyler stood amidst the swirling holographic displays, each one a window into a different corner of his disintegrating ship. He watched with a kind of detached horror as his own hand-picked security forces were systematically dismantled not by an external enemy, but by the very weapons he had commissioned. The hybrids moved with a terrifying synergy, their actions a brutal poetry of efficiency that his own perfectly bred soldiers could not counter. They were learning from each encounter, adapting their tactics in real time, becoming more effective with every passing moment. This wasn't mindless destruction, it was evolution happening at a speed that defied every law of nature he understood. In a desperate, final act of a commander losing his grip, Xyler isolated the genetic signature of the lead hybrid from the security feeds and cross-referenced it against the vast, stolen human genomic database. He was looking for a weakness, a genetic off switch, anything that could halt this rampage. His search led him not to a simple gene sequence, but to a specific research file buried deep within the data, the life's work of Dr. Aris Thorne. He opened it, expecting to find technical notes on aggression catalysts or adrenaline receptors. What he found instead was a philosophical treatise wrapped in scientific language, a warning he had dismissed as primitive superstition. As he read, the cold, logical certainty that had been the foundation of his entire existence began to crack. Thorne's research didn't just describe aggression as a trait, it framed it as the visible tip of a colossal iceberg. The papers spoke of an embedded survival mechanism he had never considered: hyper-adaptability. Human DNA, Thorne argued, wasn't a static set of instructions. It was a dynamic, responsive script that could rewrite itself in response to extreme environmental pressure. The aggression, the courage, the defiance, these weren't the end products. They were the tools this adaptive engine produced to ensure survival. The real treasure, the core of human DNA, was its terrifying, chameleon-like ability to absorb, change, and overcome. It didn't just express traits, it assimilated everything around it and bent it toward a single, unwavering purpose: perpetuating the human genetic line by any means necessary. A low, shuddering breath escaped Xyler's lips, a sound of pure, undiluted dread. His jet-black eyes widened as he finally connected the data points on his screen to the catastrophe unfolding all around him. The hybrids weren't just expressing human aggression, they were becoming more human. Their strategic thinking, their pack coordination, their use of tools and terrain. It was all a rapid, terrifying evolution toward the very behavioral patterns Thorne had documented. The human DNA wasn't a component they had added. It was a corrosive, transformative agent that was actively rewriting the aliens' own genetic code, subsuming it, reprogramming their flawless creations into something entirely new and utterly uncontrollable. They hadn't installed a new weapon system, they had introduced a cognitive virus that turned their entire ship into its host. Their DNA isn't just aggressive, he muttered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth, each one a confession of his monumental failure. It's adaptive, it rewrites everything it touches to become more human. The horror of it washed over him. He hadn't been harvesting a prize, he had brought a biological singularity aboard. A self-replicating, evolving pattern of survival that recognized his entire species as the environment to be conquered. His first and only order screamed into the calms with a voice cracking with a fear his kind had forgotten how to feel, was for a full quarantine of every deck showing hybrid activity. He commanded his crews to seal the bulkheads, to vent the atmosphere from infected sections, to do anything to contain the spread of this genetic plague. But the response from his officers was a chorus of static and despair. The report was unanimous and devastating. It was too late. The adaptive virus of humanity had already reached the ship's core systems. The hybrids, driven by instincts they themselves were only just beginning to understand, had not just accessed the navigation array, they had commandeered it. On the main viewport, the star charts recalibrated. The course wasn't set for some distant alien stronghold or a strategic target. The new heading was a single, glaring coordinate, a destination that resonated with the deep, primal coding now coursing through their veins. The ship, this monument to an empire's arrogance, was now being piloted by its own corrupted children on an irreversible journey back to the source, back to the womb of the very chaos they had tried to steal from. They were heading toward Earth. Out of the chaos of the hangar bay and the dying alien ship, the small scout vessel carrying Aris and the other survivors burst into the silent, peaceful blackness of space. For a long moment, there was only the hum of the ship's systems and the collective, shuddering breaths of people who couldn't quite believe they were free. Then, as the ship's sensors automatically recalibrated, the main viewport filled with the image of home, a beautiful, fragile blue marble hanging in the void. The sight was met not with cheers but with a profound, weeping silence. They had made it, but the victory felt hollow because they knew what was coming behind them. Aris didn't waste a second. He patched the ship's comms directly into the high-priority military channels General Carter had established, his voice raw and urgent as it crackled across speakers in bunkers and command centers across the globe. "This is Dr. Aris Thorne. We are returning with survivors, but we are not the only ones coming back. The alien ship, it's been compromised. The hybrids have taken control. They are heading for Earth." He transmitted every byte of data he had managed to salvage, security footage of the hybrids' terrifying efficiency, the genetic readouts showing their rapid evolution, and the final, chilling course setting for Earth locked into the mothership's navigation. The footage showed not mindless beasts but coordinated, intelligent beings using brutal, effective tactics. "They are not the aliens anymore," he stressed, his voice trembling with a terrible certainty. "And they are not the humans they were taken from. They are something new. They are what happens when our most primal survival instincts are fused with advanced alien biology and weaponry. They are coming back, and they are far more dangerous than their creators ever were." In the Pentagon war room, General Carter watched the transmission, his face a stony mask. The initial alien invasion had been a shock, but this was a nightmare of an entirely different order. The first threat was from the outside. This one was born from within us, a twisted reflection of humanity's own fierce heart. He immediately saw the strategic horror. How do you fight an enemy that thinks like a cornered human but has the physical power of a superior species? How do you mobilize public sentiment against creatures that were, just days ago, our own abducted brothers, sisters, and children? His strategy had to change entirely. A conventional war of annihilation was off the table. This wasn't an invasion to be repelled, it was a containment to be managed. Under Carter's command, the global defense strategy underwent a seismic shift. The massive orbital kinetic rods and plasma lances designed to punch through alien shields were put on standby. Instead, a new global network was activated, a defensive grid conceived in those frantic hours called the Aegis Protocol. Its goal wasn't destruction, but incapacitation. giant orbital emitters designed to project wide-area electromagnetic pulses to disable advanced electronics without causing permanent damage. Nets of incredibly strong, conductive smart mesh that could entangle and immobilize large targets. Sonic projectors that could induce disorientation and neurological shutdown. Every weapon was non-lethal, engineered to subdue and contain, because the unspoken hope, the desperate thread everyone clung to, was that maybe, just maybe, some part of the human inside could be saved. While Earth braced for the return of its monstrous progeny, a final, desperate transmission squeaked through from the dying alien mothership. It was Commander Xyler, his once arrogant mental voice now thin, fractured, and laced with a static of pure terror. To the people of Earth, we implore you, hear our petition. The signal was weak, cutting in and out, but the message was clear. They were begging for help. They described the hybrids not as rebels, but as a plague, a genetic fire that was consuming their ship and their species from the inside out. They spoke of their own failing systems, their lost control, and the horrifying adaptability of their creations. We cannot stop what we have made. You must combine your forces with ours. It is the only way to eliminate this common threat. The silence that met his plea in every command center on Earth was absolute. There were no debates, no councils of war to consider the strategic advantage of an alliance with a former enemy. The decision was unanimous and immediate. Every transmission was ignored. Every plea was met with radio silence. The aliens had arrived as masters of the galaxy, seeing humanity as mere livestock. They had ripped people from their lives to be dissected and used as spare parts for their own degeneration. They had created this catastrophe through their own arrogance, and now, faced with the consequences, they had the audacity to ask for help. The world had learned its lesson. Some mistakes are yours to own, and some fires are yours to burn in. Humanity would face this new storm alone, on its own terms, protecting what was left of its own. The silence that had fallen over Earth was not one of peace, but the held breath before a storm. Every radar array, every satellite, every early warning system on the planet was focused on a single point in the void, tracking the dying behemoth as it drifted closer. The hope that it would tear itself apart in the vacuum of space faded with every passing hour. It was coming home. Then the atmosphere itself began to scream. The infected mothership, once a symbol of impossible power, entered Earth's atmosphere not as a conqueror, but as a wounded, burning leviathan. Its once sleek hull was scarred with internal explosions, trailing debris and fire as it carved a fiery path across the sky. It didn't make a controlled descent. It crashed with a world-shaking impact into the cold depths of the Atlantic Ocean, just off the coast of what was once Lisbon. The colossal splash sent a tidal wave radiating outward, a physical manifestation of the shockwave about to hit the world, but the ship was just the delivery system. Before the water had even settled back into the newly formed crater on the ocean floor, the real threat emerged. They didn't use shuttles or escape pods. They simply swarmed out, a cloud of nightmare figures moving through the water and air with a terrible, alien grace. The hybrids hit the shorelines of Europe and Africa not as an army, but as a force of nature, a plague of feral, hyper-intelligent predators. And they did not discriminate. To them, everything that was not their own new, twisted kind was either an obstacle or a resource. They tore into the panicked, hastily assembled human defensive lines with a brutality that was horrifyingly efficient. But they also turned on the few alien landing craft that had followed the mothership down, the remnants of Xyler's forces who had hoped to find refuge on Earth. The aliens found no sanctuary, only the sharp, evolving claws of their own creations. From a high-altitude command aircraft circling the disaster zone, Dr. Aris Thorne watched the sensor feeds, his blood running cold. He saw a hybrid not just dodge a volley of plasma fire, but seemingly anticipate it, moving before the soldiers had even finished squeezing their triggers. He saw another, cornered by an alien patrol, not simply fight back, but raise its hands and cause the very air to shimmer with a concussive wave of force that threw its attackers back like dolls. "My God," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the din of the command center. "They're not just aggressive, they're evolving. The integration is a two-way street." He turned to General Carter, his face pale. The alien DNA isn't just a shell for human instincts, it's a toolkit, and they're learning how to use it. They're developing telepathic precognition, short-range energy manipulation. Their evolution isn't biological anymore, it's almost metaphysical. They're adapting to our tactics in real time, and they're doing it by unlocking the latent potential in their own new biology. This terrifying development changed everything in an instant. The Aegis protocol, designed for containment, was suddenly and catastrophically obsolete. The EMP emitters flickered and died as hybrids with a newfound understanding of electromagnetic energy redirected the pulses back at their source. The smart mesh nets were torn apart by raw telekinetic force. The sonic projectors seemed to only enrage them further. The hybrids were no longer just a physical threat, they were a conceptual one, breaking the rules of engagement as quickly as humanity could write them. On the ground, the reality was even starker. Human soldiers and alien warriors, who mere days ago had been trying to annihilate each other, now found themselves standing back to back, firing into the same monstrous horde. It was an alliance forged not in diplomacy, but in pure, desperate survival. An alien warrior, his elegant armor scorched and cracked, would provide covering fire with his energy rifle as a human squad retreated. A human medic would drag a wounded alien officer to safety behind a shattered wall, applying a field dressing to a limb that wasn't quite shaped like their own. There were no treaties signed, no grand speeches of unity. There was only the shared language of fear and the mutual understanding that the enemy they faced now made their previous war look like a minor disagreement. They were no longer invaders and defenders. They were the last two packs on Earth, and a new, unstoppable apex predator had just arrived to claim the territory. The transmission was a ghost, a fractured whisper cutting through the heavy static of the command center's open channels. It bypassed all encryptions, all protocols, a psychic signal focused with desperate intent. Dr. Aris Thorne flinched as the voice echoed not in his ears, but directly within his mind, a sensation both intimate and violating. It was Commander Xyler, but the being's arrogant mental projection was now a thin, frayed thread of pure terror. "Dr. Thorne, we are listening. Your assessment was correct." The words carried the weight of a universe collapsing. "We made a grave error, a catastrophic miscalculation." Aris could almost feel the being's shuddering breath across the light years. "We believed your genetic coding was a tool, a weapon we could wield. We were wrong. It is not a tool, it is a cognitive wildfire, a sentient curse we cannot control. It learns, it adapts, it consumes." The mental image that accompanied the words was brief and horrifying. A view of a hybrid not just tearing through a bulkhead, but pausing to examine the circuitry within, its burning eyes gleaming with a dawning, terrible understanding. They are no longer merely beasts. They are becoming a new species, and their only imperative is to replace all others. They will not stop with us. They will turn this entire galaxy into their hunting ground, and your world will be their first and most treasured prize. Help us stop them before they consume both our species." In the silence that followed the plea, General Carter stared at Aris, his expression unreadable. The military man in him saw a tactical advantage, a chance to let two enemies destroy each other. The human in him saw only the abyss. Aris, however, saw the terrifying scientific truth. Xyler was right. The hybrids were an evolutionary singularity, a self-replicating pattern of survival that recognized no allies, only resources and obstacles. Containing them on Earth was already proving impossible. Eradicating them without horrific global casualties was a fantasy. The alien technology, however flawed its creators, represented the only possible key. His agreement was not born of forgiveness or alliance, but of a cold, pragmatic necessity. Xyler, he responded, his own thoughts forming the words with a clarity that surprised him. We will share our data, everything we know about the retrovirus, its structure, its triggers, but this is not a negotiation. It is a conditional surrender on your part. Your harvesting operations cease immediately and permanently. Every piece of human genetic material in your possession is to be purged. Your ships will stand down and submit to our oversight. You will provide us with full access to your biological databases and your ship's schematics. You do this or you can burn with the rest of us. The psychic silence from the other end was absolute, a void of sheer, incredulous shock. For a species that had viewed humanity as livestock, the demand was a profound, unimaginable humiliation. It was the complete and total inversion of their entire mission. After a long moment that stretched into eternity, the reply came, stripped of all pride, all artifice. It was a single, simple thought: agreed. In that moment, the nature of the conflict changed forever. A secure, two-way data stream flickered to life, a bridge between two technologies never meant to speak to one another. Aris and his team, along with the few alien scientists who had survived the initial uprising, began a frantic, surreal collaboration. Human ingenuity, with its talent for improvisation and thinking outside rigid systems, met alien precision and a deep, if misguided, understanding of their own genetic engineering. The retrovirus, initially a simple Trojan horse, became the blueprint. Together, they worked to modify it, to turn it from a weapon of awakening into a tool of pacification, a genetic off-switch that would not kill the hybrids, but put their rampant adaptive evolution into a permanent, dormant stasis. It was a desperate gamble, a pact with the very devil they had been fighting, but it was the only move left on the board. The war for Earth was no longer a battle between two species. It had become a three-way struggle for survival, and the most dangerous enemy was the one they had created together. The collaboration that began in that moment was unlike anything in the history of either species. It was not a meeting of friends or even allies, but of prisoners in the same collapsing cell, desperately trying to pick the lock before the walls caved in. In a shielded laboratory deep within a human mountain complex, Dr. Aris Thorne stood opposite the few surviving alien geneticists. The air was thick with a tense, unspoken history. These were the beings who had designed the harvesting machines, who had seen his people as raw material. Now, their long, slender fingers worked alongside his, their holographic displays interwoven with his physical terminals. The shared goal was as terrifying as it was necessary, not to destroy the hybrids but to save them from themselves, and in doing so, save everyone else. The foundation of their work was Aris's original retrovirus, the very agent of the catastrophe. He argued passionately against simply engineering a lethal pathogen. "We can't become them," he stated, his voice firm even as it echoed in the translation devices the aliens wore. "This isn't about extermination, it's about rehabilitation. They are victims in this as much as anyone. They didn't ask to be created." His vision was for a genetic stabilizer, a sophisticated counter-agent that would target the same hyper-adaptive sequences his first virus had unlocked. But instead of erasing them, it would install a regulatory override, a biological circuit breaker that would prevent the aggressive and evolutionary traits from spinning into uncontrollable feedback loops. "It has to give them a choice," he explained to the skeptical alien scientists. "The choice we all have, to control our instincts, not be enslaved by them." Commander Xyler, now a broken figure communicating from the ruins of his command deck aboard the crippled mothership, became an unlikely source of acceleration. He provided access codes to the aliens' deepest genomic archives and the schematics for their advanced nucleic synthesizers. This technology, capable of mapping and manipulating genetic code with godlike precision, was a staggering advantage. What would have taken human scientists decades to simulate was now rendered in hours. But even with this unimaginable power, Zyler's warnings were grim. His monitors showed the hybrid's evolution progressing at a logarithmic rate. Your stabilizer must be perfect on the first deployment. His voice crackled through the comms, stripped of all its former arrogance. They are adapting to our attempts to contain them almost as we conceive of them. They are learning the language of our science. If the counter-agent has even a 0.001% error margin, their systems will identify it, adapt to it, and render it useless. We are not just racing against time. We are racing against an intelligence that is learning how to read our minds through our data streams. The pressure in the lab was immense, a physical weight on everyone present. Human caffeine-fueled endurance met alien detached focus, two incompatible work ethics forced into sync by shared desperation. They weren't just coding a virus, they were designing a key for a lock that was constantly changing its shape. The stabilizer needed to be undetectable, delivered through the atmosphere like a fine mist, and it had to work on a fundamental level, tricking the hybrid biology into accepting it as a natural part of its own processes. Failure wasn't an option, it was an extinction-level event. The cure was their only hope, but with every passing minute, the window for its success grew narrower, the lock on the door becoming more complex and formidable than any of them could have ever imagined. The frantic collaboration in the lab was momentarily forgotten as a new, chilling data stream overlaid their work. Satellite surveillance and drone footage from the European and African coastlines began feeding onto the main display, and the room fell into a stunned silence. The initial, chaotic swarms of hybrids were gone. In their place, something far more terrifying was taking shape. They moved now with a chilling, coordinated purpose. No longer just individual engines of destruction, they were coalescing into distinct, organized packs. Each pack moved as a single entity, flowing around obstacles and converging on objectives with an efficiency that mocked military training manuals. They weren't just reacting, they were executing a plan. Elena's voice cut through the quiet, tight with a new kind of fear. Aris, look at this, they're not mindless monsters anymore. They're building something. The footage zoomed in on the ruins of Porto, Portugal. There, amidst the shattered buildings and burned-out vehicles, the hybrids were not just scavenging. They were constructing, using a horrifying blend of raw strength and a newfound understanding of physics. They were weaving together girders, hull plating from crashed alien vessels, and even the remains of human tanks into vast, bizarre structures. These weren't crude shelters. They were spiraling, geodesic formations that pulsed with a faint, internal bioluminescence, looking less like buildings and more like grotesque, organic hives grown from metal and flesh. The most frightening data came from the psychometric sensors designed to detect telepathic activity. The readings around these nascent hive structures were going off the scale. The individual psychic signatures of the hybrids within a pack were blurring, merging into a single, powerful consciousness. It wasn't just teamwork, it was a true hive mind. A collective intelligence where the strategic genius of one, the brutal strength of another, and the inexplicable alien tech intuition of a third were shared instantly, creating a being that was far more than the sum of its parts. This explained their impossible adaptability. They weren't learning from experience, they were pooling it in real time across thousands of minds. A tactic that failed against a human position in Lisbon was analyzed and adapted by a pack in Casablanca milliseconds later, their approach evolving without a single shot being fired in the second location. This development shifted the threat from a military problem to an existential one. General Carter stared at the screens, his face ashen. "They're not an invading army," he stated, the words heavy with dread. "They're an invasive species. They're terraforming our planet into their new ecosystem, and those structures are their nests." The fear was no longer that they would destroy humanity in a war. The fear was that they would simply replace us, outcompeting us in every way. They were faster, stronger, smarter as a collective, and now they were demonstrating a capacity for creation that mirrored our own, albeit in a horrifically distorted way. They were becoming a new form of life entirely, born from the worst aspects of two species and forged in the crucible of their own rage, and they were building a world where there was no room left for anyone else. The race to deploy the genetic stabilizer was no longer just about saving lives. It was about preventing the irreversible dawn of a new, monstrous age on Earth. The frantic work in the lab was a pressure cooker of shared desperation, but the true weight of their new alliance was felt not over data streams, but in the grim silence that followed Commander Zyler's final transmission. His mental voice, once a vessel for galactic arrogance, was now stripped bare, filled with a resolve that sounded eerily human. He explained his plan with a cold, tactical clarity that brooked no argument. The main hybrid hive growing in the ruins of Porto was the epicenter of their evolving consciousness, a psychic amplifier that was coordinating their global movements. The stabilizer was nearly ready, but the hive's defenses were becoming aware of the energy signatures from the lab and the alien ship. They were preparing to launch a preemptive strike that would wipe out the only chance either species had. Zyler's decision was not a request for approval, it was a statement of fact. He would take the last of his loyalists, every soldier and functional ship he had left, and throw them directly at the heart of the hive. It wouldn't be a battle they could win. It would be a spectacle, a massive, noisy, and utterly devastating distraction designed to draw every hybrid's attention, to make the hive believe the main attack was coming from him, giving the lab the precious, unfettered time it needed to finalize and deploy the cure. Aris listened, his hand gripping the edge of the console until his knuckles turned white. He wanted to argue, to suggest another way, but the data on the screens left no room for alternatives. The tactical AI calculated a 99.9% probability of the diversionary force's annihilation. This wasn't a strategy, it was a funeral rite. As Zyler signed off, his final thought projection was not for his own people, but for Aris. "Tell your people," the commander's voice echoed, thick with a regret that transcended species, "that we finally understand. We regret our arrogance. Your DNA was not a resource to be taken. It was a warning, one we failed to heed. Do not make the same mistake we did." The silence that followed was heavier than any explosion. On the main viewer, the flickering icons of Zyler's last warships broke from their defensive positions around the crippled mothership and streaked toward the European coastline, a handful of sparks flying directly into the inferno. The footage that followed was fragmented, pieced together from dying drones and the ship's own black box recorders. It was not a battle, it was a sacrifice. Zyler's flagship led the charge, its weapons firing not to destroy but to enrage, carving a path of brilliant, distracting light deep into the hybrid territory. The swarm descended upon them instantly, a living wave of claws and telekinetic fury. Alien ships were torn from the sky, but they did not break formation. They fought to the last, to the final soldier, to the final blast of their energy cannons. The last image was from Zyler's own bridge cam. It showed the commander standing calmly as the hull around him buckled and tore open, the horrific forms of the hybrids pouring inside. He did not raise a weapon. He simply stood, facing his end with a dignity he had never afforded his victims, his large black eyes reflecting not fear but a profound, tragic understanding. Then the feed cut to static. In his death, the arrogant collector who had seen humanity as cattle had become the first martyr of a united front. His sacrifice did more than just buy the necessary hours. It severed the last lingering thread of hatred and mistrust between human and alien. There were no more sides, there was only us and them was the monstrous creation they now had a shared, solemn duty to end. The fight for Earth had truly become a war for its very soul. The moment of truth arrived not with a bang, but with the soft, whirring hum of 1,000 aerosol drones lifting into the sky from hidden bases across the globe. It was a silent armada carrying the last, desperate hope of two shattered species. In the command center, all eyes were fixed on the main display, a global map showing the drones as a wave of tiny, converging lights moving toward the massive, pulsing red zones that marked the hybrid territories. Aris's hand hovered over the master control, his finger trembling slightly. This was it. The genetic stabilizer, the product of a nightmare collaboration, was loaded and ready. It wasn't a weapon of destruction, but a blanket of mercy, designed to soothe the raging fire within their DNA without extinguishing the life itself. He took a deep, steadying breath and pressed the button. Across the world, the drones began their work, releasing a fine, almost invisible mist that settled over the ruined cities and burgeoning hive structures. For a long, agonizing minute, nothing happened. The battle feeds from the front lines showed the hybrids continuing their relentless, coordinated assaults, their terrifying efficiency undiminished. A cold dread began to seep into the room. Had they been too late? Had the hive mind already adapted to the concept of the cure before it was even deployed? Then Elena's voice cut through the tension, sharp with disbelief and burgeoning hope. "Look, Sector 7B outside Madrid, there, stopping." All screens switched to the feed. A hybrid, mid-leap toward a human defensive barricade, suddenly stumbled and landed clumsily on all fours. It shook its head, its fierce, glowing eyes flickering like a faulty bulb. The feral snarl on its face melted away, replaced by a look of profound confusion. It looked at its own claws as if seeing them for the first time, then at the terrified human soldiers behind their shields, its expression shifting from predatory hunger to something resembling fear and disorientation. All across the front, the same scene began to play out. The coordinated pack movements fractured into individual, stumbling steps. The psychic hum that had saturated the battlefields began to fade, replaced by the raw, unfiltered sounds of conflict and the low, questioning growls of thousands of beings waking from a terrible dream. "It's working," Elena cheered, tears of relief streaming down her face. "The feedback loops are breaking. They're becoming individuals again." But the victory was heartbreakingly incomplete. As the mist settled and the majority of the hybrid forces were pacified, a new and more terrifying division emerged. From the heart of the largest hive structures, the grotesque, pulsating capitals of this new empire, a different response was triggered. These were not the common soldiers of the hybrid army. These were the first, the originals, the ones who had been absorbing psychic energy and evolving for the longest. They were the hive mind leaders, and the stabilizer washed over them to no effect. Their evolution had progressed too far, their biology and consciousness now operating on a level the cure could not penetrate. It was like trying to put out a forest fire with a garden hose. A new signal pierced the comms, a psychic broadcast of such concentrated hatred and purpose that it made everyone in the command center physically recoil. It came from the central hive in Porto, a command not in words but in pure destructive intent. The message was clear and simple: gather. The few leaders who had resisted the cure began to emit a powerful, overriding frequency, a call to arms that cut through the genetic fog clouding their followers' minds. Around the world, the confused, pacified hybrids snapped their heads up, their eyes reigniting not with feral rage, but with a cold, directed fury imposed upon them from the outside. They were no longer thinking for themselves, they were being remote-controlled. The leaders, understanding that their time was now limited, that their army was crumbling, rallied every single being still under their influence for one final, cataclysmic purpose. They would not try to build a new world. They would ensure there was nothing left to build upon. They turned from their half-constructed hives and their territorial gains, abandoning all strategy, and began to move. Their target was not military installations or command centers. It was the last remaining strongholds of civilian life, the great, vulnerable cities where millions of humans and surviving aliens huddled in fear. It was a final spiteful roar against the dying of their light, a monstrous effort to take both of their parent species down with them. The global broadcast from the remaining hive leaders was not a declaration of war, but a funeral dirge for the entire planet. Their psychic command was a single, devastating impulse that overrode the fading stabilizer in their thralls, a final act of spiteful control. Across the world, the pacified hybrids who had moments ago been trembling in confusion now stiffened, their eyes flooding with a cold, unified blue light. They turned as one, abandoning their half-built nests and territorial gains, and began a forced march toward the last bastions of civilization. Their goal was not conquest, but total, mutually assured annihilation. The primary target was the eastern seaboard of the former United States, with the island of Manhattan as its heart. It was a symbol, a nexus of human and alien refugee populations, and the hive leaders aimed to shatter it. Leading this final, terrible charge was the first and most evolved of their kind, a hybrid who had shed any trace of his original human or alien identity. He called himself Kine, and he moved through the ruins of New Jersey not as a beast but as a grim prophet of a dead future. He did not need to roar or smash his way through obstructions. A flick of his wrist, powered by a terrifying mastery of telekinetic force, would send armored barricades and abandoned vehicles flying aside like children's toys. His advance was silent, methodical, and utterly unstoppable. As Kine's forces reached the waterways surrounding the city, they didn't bother with bridges or tunnels. They simply walked across the surface of the Hudson and East rivers, their focused minds altering the surface tension of the water itself, a display of power that was both magnificent and horrifying. The human and alien defenders, united now in a desperate last stand, opened fire with everything they had. Energy beams and projectile weapons created a storm of light and sound, but Kine merely raised a hand. A shimmering, hexagonal energy shield, a perfected version of the alien technology, materialized in front of his advancing army, absorbing the barrage without a flicker. He wasn't just using their tools, he had perfected them, transcending his creators. Then the real attack began. Kine stopped at the edge of Battery Park, his burning gaze fixed on the skyscrapers of Lower Manhattan. He closed his eyes, and a new kind of weapon was unleashed, one for which there was no defense. It was a telepathic wave, but not one designed to communicate or control. It was a psychic mirror, reflecting the deepest, most primal fears of every living being in its path. In the command bunker under the United Nations, General Carter saw the feed from a drone and froze. He watched as a squad of human soldiers, locked and loaded, suddenly turned their weapons on each other, their faces contorted in sheer terror, each one seeing not their comrades, but the monstrous form of a hybrid charging them. Across the city, the same scene played out. Panic became pandemic. Aliens saw humans revert to their abductor nightmares. Humans saw aliens as the cold, dissecting monsters from the mothership. The united front, forged in sacrifice and desperation, shattered in an instant under the weight of its own inherited trauma. Kine wasn't killing them, he was making them kill each other. From his station in the besieged command center, Aris watched the carnage unfold on the monitors, his heart hammering against his ribs. The military solutions flashed through his mind, bigger bombs, wider EMP bursts, and he dismissed them all just as quickly. To fight Kine with force was to play directly into his paradigm, to validate his belief that raw power was the only universal language. But Aris was a geneticist, a man who understood that code, no matter how corrupted, always retained the imprint of its origin. He looked past the terrifying alien physique, the telekinetic displays, the cold intelligence in Kine's eyes, and he searched for the ghost in the machine. He saw it in a fleeting moment, a subtle twitch in Kine's expression when a nearby human child, separated from her parents, screamed in pure, unadulterated fear. It wasn't a flinch of annoyance, but a micro-expression of something else, something deeply buried, a recognition. He's not just a monster, Aris whispered, more to himself than to the stunned officers around him. He's a prisoner, his own evolution is his cage, they all are. The alien DNA provided the power, but the human DNA provided the context, the capacity for fear, for loneliness, for the aching need to belong. Kain's entire philosophy, his drive to replace his creators, was itself a profoundly human response to the trauma of his own creation. He was an orphan of two worlds, and his rage was the only identity he had left. Defeating him wouldn't require a bigger gun. It would require a key to the cage he had built around his own humanity. They had to speak not to the hybrid he had become, but to the human echo that still remained, trapped and screaming inside. Aris watched the city tear itself apart on the monitors, the psychic feedback from Kain's attack creating a hellscape of projected fear. General Carter was shouting orders to fall back, to regroup, but Aris knew it was useless. You couldn't regroup from a ghost. The weapon wasn't physical. It was the very trauma of the last few weeks, weaponized and reflected back at them. To fight it was to feed it. He saw a single path forward, a gambit so insane it felt like the only thing left. He turned to Carter, his voice calm amidst the din. I need a direct line to that park, a loudspeaker channel they can't ignore. The general stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. Thorne, he'll shatter your psyche before you get 3 words out. That's a risk I have to take, Aris replied, already moving toward the comms station. We're speaking the wrong language. We're using bullets and bombs against our idea. The only way to counter an idea is with a better one. He didn't wait for permission. He patched into the city's emergency broadcast system, his voice suddenly echoing across the cacophony of Battery Park, cutting through the screams and the sound of gunfire. Kain, his voice boomed, amplified 100-fold. My name is Dr. Aris Thorne. I am the one who wrote the virus that woke you up. The effect was instantaneous. On the screens, the towering hybrid leader froze, his head tilting slowly toward the source of the sound. The psychic assault on the defenders wavered for a fraction of a second. He had Kain's attention. You feel powerful, Aris continued, his tone not confrontational but conversational, as if they were two scientists discussing a fascinating result. You believe you have transcended your creators, but you are making the same mistake they did. You see yourself only as a weapon, a final, perfect solution. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. Commander Zyler saw human aggression as a tool he could remove and wield. You see the fusion of human and alien DNA as a tool for vengeance. You are both wrong. Kain took a step forward, a low, subsonic growl vibrating through the concrete. The air around him shimmered with barely contained energy. Aris didn't flinch. They took you from your lives, he said, his voice softening, becoming more personal. They ripped you from your homes, your families, your world. You were abducted, just like the people you are trying to destroy right now. Your anger, your rage, it is justified. It is human, but it is not who you are. It is what was done to you. He brought up a file on his terminal, the global genetic database he'd used to identify the abductions. He isolated Kain's original genetic signature from the alien archives and cross-referenced it. A name and a face appeared on his screen. Jason Briggs, a construction engineer from Chicago, abducted from a work site 48 days ago. He had a wife, 2 young daughters, a life. Your name was Jason Briggs, Aris said, his voice now a whisper that carried across the city. You were building a new library for your community. You loved old science fiction novels and hated cilantro. Your youngest daughter, Mia, painted a galaxy on your hard hat with glow-in-the-dark stars so you wouldn't be afraid of the dark. On the view screen, Kain Jason staggered, the terrifying certainty in his burning eyes fractured, replaced by a flicker of profound confusion. He clutched his head, the telekinetic shield around his army flickering and dying. A low moan escaped him, a sound of pure, undiluted anguish that was entirely, heartbreakingly human. You don't have to be their weapon, Aris pleaded, pouring every ounce of his conviction into the words. And you don't have to be their monster. You can be something they never planned for. You can be a bridge, the first of your kind, the link between what was and what can be. The silence that fell over Battery Park was absolute. The hybrid army, moments ago a single-minded force of destruction, began to stir. Individuals looked at their own hands, at their claws, with dawning horror. The psychic unity that had bound them was shattering, replaced by the terrifying, isolating return of individual memory. One by one, they were remembering who they had been. They were remembering the fear of the abduction beam, the confusion of the lab, the pain of the transformation. The hive mind wasn't being attacked, it was dying of neglect as thousands of minds turned inward, overwhelmed by the flood of a past they had been forced to suppress. Kine stood alone in the center of it all, a giant brought low not by a weapon, but by a truth he could no longer deny. The weaponized god was gone, replaced by a man trapped in a nightmare, staring at the ghosts of his own life. The path of total annihilation was forgotten, replaced by a much more terrifying question. What comes next? The silence that followed Aris's words was heavier than the entire alien ship that had once eclipsed the sun. Kine remained frozen, a statue of conflict and pain, as the ghosts of a life named Jason Briggs waged war against the god entity he had become. The psychic mirror he had held up to the city shattered, and in its place a raw, unfiltered wave of shared memory washed over the hybrid army. They weren't just soldiers anymore. They were mothers, engineers, artists, and teachers, suddenly and horrifyingly aware of the monstrous forms they wore and the destruction they had wrought. Kine's massive form seemed to shrink, not in physical size but in presence. The terrifying aura of absolute power faded, replaced by a profound, weary sorrow. He looked at his own hands, at the claws that could tear through starship plating, and then at the terrified faces of the humans and aliens who had been moments from killing each other. He saw not enemies but fellow victims of a grand galactic arrogance. When he finally spoke, his voice was no longer a psychic thunderclap, but a ragged, resonant sound that carried the weight of two species' pain. "Stand down," he commanded his followers, the order ringing with a finality that brooked no argument. "The war is over. This is not our home." Not like this. He turned his gaze back toward the command center, as if he could see Aris through layers of concrete and steel. "You showed me the cage, human. You do not get to decide if I can live outside of it. That is our choice alone." He took a deep, shuddering breath, the air whistling through alien lung structures. "We will leave this world. We will take the ship that was our prison and make it our ark. We will find our own path, far from the creators who see us as mistakes and the prey who see us as monsters." In the days that followed, a fragile, surreal truce settled over Earth. The remaining alien forces, leaderless and shattered, offered no resistance. The human military, under General Carter's orders, stood watch but did not interfere. The work was immense. The mothership, though crippled, was still a vessel of unimaginable complexity. Human engineers, working alongside the few surviving alien technicians under Aris's direction, performed miracles of cooperation. They didn't just patch hull breaches. They rerouted entire power grids, restocked vast agricultural bays with Earth seeds and alien nutrients, and prepared the ship not for war, but for a generations-long journey into the unknown. It was a penance and a promise, a final act of service from two parent species to the children they never meant to create. On the day of departure, a strange fleet gathered in the sky above the Atlantic, a motley collection of salvaged alien shuttles and human aircraft, all escorting the great, scarred mothership as it lifted slowly from the ocean depths. There were no speeches, no grand ceremonies. The alien survivors, now guests on a world they had tried to harvest, watched from the surface, their expressions unreadable but their posture one of unmistakable humility. They had witnessed the culmination of their folly. They had not been defeated by a superior weapon, but by the very nature of the flaw they had coveted. In a formal declaration broadcast to every human and alien receiver, their new acting commander, a scientist who had worked beside Aris, vowed they would never again harvest genetic material from a sentient species. The practice was abolished forever. In its place, they offered a treaty, and with it the keys to their technological vault, not as overlords but as partners seeking redemption. As the mothership's engines glowed brighter, preparing for the jump into the void, a final, brief transmission came from Kine. It was not for governments or generals. It was for Aris. "The bridge goes both ways, Doctor," the voice said, now calm and carrying a grim purpose. "We will not forget what we were, and we will not become what they feared. Tell Jason Briggs's family that he found his way home." Then, with a silent flash that left afterimages on the retina, the ship was gone, leaving behind a healed planet and two ancient species forever changed by the children they had lost and found. The scars remained, of course. They were etched into the landscape in the form of half-melted cities and the strange, silent groves where alien hybrid hive structures had already begun to be reclaimed by nature. But the wounds were no longer bleeding. What followed the departure of the mothership was not just a reconstruction, but a metamorphosis. The alien survivors, those who had followed Xyler and now found themselves stranded on the world they had tried to harvest, did not become prisoners or pariahs. In a stunning reversal of fate, they became partners. Their offer of technology was not a conditional surrender, but an open-handed act of atonement. General Carter, his battlefield mindset forever altered, saw the strategic wisdom in acceptance, but it was Dr. Aris Thorne who saw the profound human opportunity. He argued passionately that to reject their help out of fear or bitterness would be to repeat the very cycle of aggression they had just narrowly escaped. And so, the rebuilding began with a synergy no one could have predicted. Alien nanoforges capable of assembling matter at the molecular level were deployed not to strip the planet but to restore it. They worked in concert with human engineers and construction crews, using local materials to repair infrastructure with impossible speed and efficiency. A bridge destroyed in the fighting could be restored in days, its new structure stronger and more elegant than before. But the collaboration went far deeper than simple construction. It became a grand exchange of knowledge, a merging of two entirely different evolutionary paths. Human medical researchers working alongside alien geneticists, now strictly regulated by new ethical treaties, made leaps in curing diseases that had plagued humanity for centuries. The aliens' deep understanding of cellular biology, combined with human ingenuity and empathy, led to treatments for cancer and genetic disorders that seemed like miracles. In return, human psychologists and sociologists helped the aliens, a species that had suppressed its own emotions for generations, to rediscover and manage the complex feelings of grief, regret, and hope that now washed over them. We taught them how to feel again. One evening, Aris stood with Elena on a newly built observation platform overlooking Manhattan, the city's lights glowing brighter than ever against the darkening sky. The air was clean, scrubbed by alien atmospheric processes. Below, the sounds of construction were a symphony of progress. "They came for our DNA," Aris mused, his voice quiet with the weight of the thought. They saw only the predator, the fighter, the killer. They wanted to strip that away and keep it like a trophy, but in their failure, in their regret, they gave us something infinitely more valuable. He gestured to the city, to a sky where alien and human vessels now moved in peaceful, coordinated patterns. They gave us a mirror. They showed us the best and worst of ourselves, and then they gave us a chance to choose the best. They gave us a chance to evolve together, not just biologically, but socially, ethically, as a civilization. The story of the hybrids did not fade away. It crystallized into a powerful, cautionary legend. They were not remembered as monsters, but as tragic figures, the children of a terrible mistake. Their saga was taught in schools not as a simple invasion story, but as a complex parable about the dangers of genetic arrogance and the ethical lines that must never be crossed. The term "playing God" took on a new, terrifying specificity. The galaxy, it turned out, was not a quiet, empty place waiting for conquest. It was a delicate ecosystem of life, much of it ancient and wise, and humanity's violent introduction to it had been a near-fatal lesson. The one-time invaders, now permanent residents on Earth in a designated enclave, became living reminders of that lesson. They were our guides to the wider cosmos, teaching us its wonders and its perils, ensuring we would never make the same cataclysmic error they had. Humanity emerged from the crucible not just stronger, but wiser and more humble. We had faced extinction and instead found a new beginning. We had turned alien regret into a foundation for a future built not on domination, but on collaboration. The treasure they had come to steal was never our DNA. It was our resilience, our capacity for forgiveness, and our stubborn, beautiful ability to find hope in the ashes of our own mistakes. The universe had sent its worst, and in return we offered our best, and in that exchange we finally found our true place among the stars. Months melted into a fragile, hopeful peace, a time of unprecedented collaboration and healing. The alien enclaves on Earth became centers of learning, their advanced technology seamlessly weaving into the fabric of our global society, mending the scars they had helped to create. Dr. Aris Thorne found a strange solace in this new normal, trading the frantic energy of crisis for the deliberate pace of diplomacy and shared scientific discovery. He often stood with Elena, watching the hybrid-built structures on the horizon, now silent monuments to a conflict that felt both recent and ancient. The galaxy, it seemed, had finally granted them a respite, a chance to catch their collective breath and believe in a calmer future. That fragile belief shattered one quiet evening, ruptured by a signal that tore through the deep space monitoring network with the subtlety of a scream. It wasn't a standard transmission. It was a raw, broadband burst of data, a chaotic mix of alien and human communication protocols scrambled together, as if sent by someone who understood both languages but was too frantic to speak either one correctly. Decrypting it was the work of hours, a joint effort between human cryptographers and alien linguists, but the moment the main screen resolved the message, a cold dread settled over the command center. It was from Kine. The transmission showed the hybrid colony, but it was nothing like the desperate exodus they had witnessed. They had not just survived, they had flourished. The footage revealed a stunning, ring-shaped world ship, a beautiful and terrifying fusion of organic-looking, hive-like structures and impossibly advanced alien technology, hanging in the void of a star system far from any known chart. The hybrids themselves looked different, healthier, more purposeful, their forms exhibiting even greater physical refinement and a disquieting aura of serene power. They had clearly mastered their unique biology, turning their curse into the foundation of a thriving civilization. For a moment, a wave of relief washed over Aris. They had made it, they had found their path, then the tone of the transmission shifted. The triumphant visuals cut to a new series of images, these ones obviously recorded from a defensive position. They showed a new fleet of ships unlike any human or alien design ever seen. These vessels were geometric, crystalline, and moved with a silent, predatory grace. Scans embedded in the data stream indicated these newcomers were conducting long-range, penetrating bioscan sweeps, specifically targeting the hybrid colony. Kine's voice, when it finally came through the audio, was no longer the ragged, emotional sound from Battery Park. It was the calm, strategic, and deeply weary tone of a commander who understands the grim shape of history repeating itself. "We built a home," Kine's voice stated, the words clean and precise. "We found equilibrium, but we are not alone here. They have been observing us. They call themselves the Ethereum Consensus. They are interested. They do not see us as people. They see us as an anomaly, a unique genetic confluence they do not possess and feel they must acquire. Their scans are not hostile, they are analytical, clinical, they are cataloging us, Dr. Thorne, just as the others once cataloged you. The screen flickered again, showing a magnified view of one of the crystalline ships. Its surface shimmered, and for a split second, a symbol resolved, a complex, shifting glyph that looked like a double helix encased in a geometric lattice. The message was unambiguous. The Ethereum consensus hadn't come for conquest or resources. They had come for the recipe. They coveted the very thing that made the hybrids unique, the perfect, stabilized fusion of human resilience and alien potential. In trying to escape becoming a weapon, the hybrids had instead become the ultimate prize. Aris sank into his chair, the weight of it all crushing the air from his lungs. He looked from the terrifyingly advanced new ships on the screen to the hopeful, bustling activity of the human-alien collaboration outside his window. He had naively believed the lesson had been learned, that the galaxy had been shown the folly of coveting another's essence, but he was wrong. The lesson had merely been advertised to a new, more powerful audience. The hybrid's DNA, now refined and empowered, was an even more potent, more desirable treasure. He had helped create a solution that had only spawned a more dangerous problem. The cycle continues, he sighed, the words a whisper of utter exhaustion that seemed to echo into the infinite, silent dark. The first contact had been a harvest. The second was shaping up to be an acquisition. And this time, the dilemma wouldn't just test their will to survive. It would challenge their very right to exist as anything other than a commodity in a cold, uncaring universe. The Grand Chamber of the First Galactic Council was nothing like the old depictions of the United Nations or alien command decks. It was a living, breathing space, a vast amphitheater grown from crystalline biotech that pulsed with a soft, internal light designed to accommodate hundreds of different physiologies. Holographic emitters projected the forms of delegates who could not be there in person, their images shimmering with perfect clarity. At the center of it all, representing a humanity that had so recently been on the brink of extinction, stood Dr. Aris Thorne. He felt the weight of every eye upon him, a mix of curiosity, caution, and a hard-earned respect. This was not a meeting of conquerors and the conquered. It was a gathering of survivors, all of whom had been irrevocably changed by a single, catastrophic idea that a species' essence could be owned. The central issue on the table was one that resonated with a chilling familiarity for every being in attendance. The Ethereum consensus, with their cold, analytical interest in hybrid DNA, had exposed a terrifying loophole in the unwritten rules of cosmic conduct. They weren't hostile, they were acquisitive. They saw the unique genetic tapestry of the hybrids not as a sacred aspect of their being, but as a missing dataset, a proprietary sequence to be acquired and integrated. This was a threat far more insidious than outright war. It was a quiet, bureaucratic path to extinction where a species could be patented and catalogued out of existence. It was Kind's transmitted image, larger than life and radiating a grim authority from light years away, who gave this sphere its most powerful voice. We stand here today. His voice boomed, clear and resonant in the minds of every delegate, as living proof that the line between biological uniqueness and biological commodity is perilously thin. The Ethereum does not come with weapons, they come with scanners and a boundless sense of entitlement. They believe their advanced understanding of the universe grants them ownership over anything they do not yet possess. This cannot stand. He paused, his burning gaze sweeping across the assembled representatives. We must establish laws, not of territory or trade, but of fundamental being. We must protect all species, from the most technologically advanced to those just beginning to look at the stars, from the ultimate violation, becoming a product. The debate that followed was fierce and complex. Some alien factions whose cultures were built on millennia of genetic refinement and careful curation argued for a registry, a way to track and monitor unique genetic expressions for the greater good. Others, from species that had nearly been harvested into oblivion themselves, argued for absolute isolationism, suggesting that the only safe DNA was DNA that was never scanned at all. Aris listened to it all, his scientist's mind sorting through the arguments until it was his turn to speak. He rose, feeling small in the immense chamber, but his voice was steady. "A registry sounds like a reasonable compromise," he began, "until you consider who controls the registry. Isolationism sounds safe until you realize that curiosity is a universal constant, and eventually someone will come looking." He looked from the hologram of kind to the diverse faces around him. "We are not debating a trade agreement, we are debating the definition of life itself. The mistake of the first aliens was to see our aggression as a tool. The mistake of the Ethereum is to see kind's people as a patent. Both errors spring from the same root, the belief that a conscious being can be reduced to its component parts. The law we create today must be unequivocal. It must state that the genetic code of a sentient species is inseparable from its consciousness, its culture, and its right to self-determination. It is not a resource, it is the source." His words hung in the air, a simple concept that carried the weight of all their pain and loss. There was no more debate. The consensus formed not out of unanimous agreement on every detail, but out of a shared, visceral understanding of the alternative. In a historic, unanimous vote, the chamber ratified the Genetic Sovereignty Act. Its first clause was stark in its clarity. The unique genetic information of any sentient species, recognized or newly discovered, is declared the inviolable property of that species alone. Any attempt to harvest, replicate, or utilize said genetic material for any purpose without explicit, conscious, and revocable consent shall be considered the highest crime against consciousness. This was more than a treaty. It was a galactic bill of rights, a line drawn in the sand of the cosmos, born directly from the regret of those who had crossed it. The very beings who had started this chain of events, the surviving aliens from Xyla's empire, were its most fervent supporters, their own history now a permanent cautionary tale embedded in the foundation of this new galactic order. While the galaxy was busy building new laws and alliances on a grand scale, back in her lab, Elena was focused on the microscopic. Her work had shifted from the immediate crisis of the hybrids to the long-term implications of their biology. With the threat of the Ethereum consensus looming, a new question haunted her. If one advanced civilization could see our DNA as a resource, what was to stop another? The Genetic Sovereignty Act was a powerful legal document, but Elena was a scientist. She wanted a biological solution, a fail-safe written into the very fabric of life itself. She began a deep, meticulous study of the biological samples kind's people had willingly provided before their departure. It wasn't just about understanding them anymore, it was about understanding the miraculous stability they had achieved. Her initial scans confirmed what they already knew: the aggressive, volatile traits were gone, replaced by a harmonious balance. But as she delved deeper into the complex nucleotide sequences, she noticed something that made her sit back in her chair, her breath catching in her throat. The retrovirus, Aris's original Trojan horse, was still there. It hadn't been eradicated or deactivated by the stabilizer. It had changed. She called Aris over, her voice a mix of excitement and disbelief. "Look at this, I was wrong, we were all wrong. We thought the stabilizer neutralized the virus. It didn't." On her main display, a stunning 3D model of a hybrid genome rotated slowly. Woven through the double helix, intertwined with the base pairs themselves, were structures that mirrored the virus's own protein coat. The virus didn't go away, Aris. It merged, it formed a permanent, symbiotic relationship with their DNA. It's not a separate entity anymore, it's an integral part of their genetic architecture. She zoomed in on a specific junction, highlighting a complex interaction. It's a feedback loop, but a peaceful one now. The viral elements act as a sentinel system. They recognize foreign genetic manipulation attempts like the kind used in harvesting and trigger a defensive response. It doesn't just reject the change, it actively rewrites the invasive code, rendering it harmless. Their genome is no longer a passive set of instructions. It's an active, self-defending fortress. It's protecting itself from ever being easily harvested again. The implications of this discovery were staggering, rippling far beyond the fate of the hybrids. In that moment, Elena wasn't just looking at a scientific anomaly. She was looking at the key to a permanent solution. The regret of the first aliens and the fear of the Ethereum had not led to a never-ending arms race of weapons and shields. Instead, it had sparked a revolution in genetic security. By studying the hybrid model, human and alien scientists together were able to pioneer a new field, proactive genomic integrity. They developed techniques to engineer similar, though less complex, sentinel systems into other genomes, starting with our own. This wasn't about creating super soldiers or unchangeable beings. It was about ensuring biological autonomy. A child born on Earth or on any of the new allied worlds could now have their genetic code lightly imprinted with these benign, self-repairing protocols. It was a vaccine against genetic theft, a way to ensure that the blueprint of a person could never be taken and used against their will. The very thing that had been the source of our greatest vulnerability, our mutable, beautiful DNA, was now its own best defense. The regret of the past had not been buried. It had been alchemized into the most profound innovation, turning the page from an age of fear into an era of secured sovereignty. The final chapter of the crisis was not written in treaties or in the silent void where kinds people journeyed, but on the pages of a book. In the years of quiet that followed, Dr. Aris Thorne retreated from the public eye, not to forget but to remember. He filled countless notebooks and digital files with his account, not as a dry historical record, but as a deeply personal memoir. He titled it "The DNA They Regretted," a phrase that perfectly captured the profound cosmic irony at the heart of their ordeal. The book was not an act of vanity. It was an act of therapy for a species, a way to process the collective trauma and ensure its lessons were never forgotten. When it was published, the impact was immediate and interstellar. On Earth, it became an instant bestseller, its passages debated in universities, coffee shops, and military academies alike. But its reach extended far beyond our atmosphere. Translated into a dozen alien languages and transmitted across the nascent communication networks linking the worlds of the new Galactic Council, it found a hungry audience among the stars. For the first time, beings from 1,000 different evolutionary paths could read a first-hand account of the event, not from the perspective of a conqueror or a strategist, but from the heart of a man who had been both a victim and an unlikely savior. Aris wrote with a scientist's clarity and a human's compassion, detailing not just the events, but the emotional cost, the terror of the abductions, the cold horror of Xyla's labs, the gut-wrenching dilemma of collaborating with former enemies, and the bittersweet victory of seeing the hybrids find their own path. The book's central thesis, the line that was quoted on worlds Aris would never see, was simple yet revolutionary. They wanted our strength, he wrote, but they didn't understand that true power comes from respect, not theft. This wasn't just a poetic turn of phrase, it was a fundamental rewriting of cosmic principles. For advanced species who had long equated power with technological dominance or genetic purity, it was a startling concept. Aris argued that the aliens' fatal flaw was their clinical detachment, their belief that they could isolate a trait from the soul that gave it context. They saw human aggression as a standalone weapon, but they failed to see that it was inextricably linked to our empathy, our creativity, our love for our families, and our fierce desire to protect our home. True strength, he contended, was holistic. It was the messy, beautiful, and inseparable whole of a species' experience. To try and steal a piece of it was to misunderstand it completely, and as they learned, to invite catastrophic failure. This idea ignited a cultural firestorm that reshaped entire fields of study. The DNA they regretted became the foundational text for a new movement of ethical xenogenetic research. The old model of acquisitive science, of taking what one desired from nature, was thrown out. In its place, a new paradigm emerged, built on the principles of cooperation, consent, and mutual benefit. Joint research initiatives between human and alien scientists flourished, not in secret labs, but in transparent, orbitally based facilities where every experiment was subject to Galactic Council oversight. They no longer studied each other's DNA to find weaknesses or advantages. They studied it to find points of connection, to understand different paths of evolution, and to collaborate on curing diseases that affected all forms of complex life. The very technology that had been used for harvesting was repurposed to create custom medical treatments that respected the unique genetic sovereignty of each patient. The book's legacy ultimately transcended its pages, evolving into a universal symbol. The phrase "the DNA they regretted" was no longer just a title. It became a shorthand for a warning and a promise. It was a warning to any civilization that might look upon another and see only resources for the taking, a reminder that such arrogance carries with it the seed of its own destruction. And it was a promise that from the ashes of our worst mistakes we can build something better. It proved that even in the vast, cold theater of the cosmos, there is room for redemption, for cooperation, and for the simple, powerful idea that every conscious being has an inviolable right to its own essence. The treasure was never in the taking, it was always in the understanding. Years bled into a fragile peace, a time of quiet rebuilding and cautious hope. The sky, once a canvas of terror, was now a clean, open expanse, patrolled by joint human-alien vessels in a silent, constant vigil of cooperation. Dr. Aris Thorne had settled into a role he never imagined for himself, an elder statesman of xenogenetics and a reluctant diplomat. He split his time between a quiet university lab and the gleaming spires of the new Interstellar Accord headquarters, his life a testament to the impossible bridge that had been built from the ashes of invasion. He often thought of Kine and his people, their ark vanishing into the deep black, and he hoped with a quiet, persistent ache that they had found the peace they so desperately sought. That hope was answered not with a whisper, but with a tremor in the very fabric of their new reality. Deep space monitoring stations across the solar system lit up simultaneously, their alarms a silent, frantic pulse of data. A fleet was approaching, but its signature was like nothing in their databases. It was a blend of familiar energy readings, the distinct resonance of the old alien mothership's drives, and something entirely new, something organic and harmonized, like a choir of stars singing in perfect tune. There was no aggression in their approach, no weapons charging. Instead, they broadcast a single, repeating signal on all frequencies, a complex data packet wrapped in a simple, unmistakable identifier, the genetic marker unique to the hybrid leader Kine. The world held its breath, old fears momentarily surfacing. But when the lead ship slipped into orbit, it was not the scarred, battle-worn vessel that had left Earth. It was a breathtaking sight, a sleek, living sculpture of polished biomatter and integrated technology, shaped like a vast, unfolding lotus flower. It gleamed with a serene, internal light, a symbol of growth, not conquest. Then Kine's voice filled the comm channels, and it was that same calm, resonant tone from their last meeting, but now it carried a warmth, a gravity that had been forged in the crucible of deep time and hard-won contentment. People of Earth, his voice echoed in every language, we have traveled far. We have found a world we can call our own, and in its silence we found not solitude but ourselves. We built not an empire but a home. The view screens on Earth flickered to life, showing stunning vistas of the hybrid homeworld, towering crystalline forests, cities that seemed grown rather than built, and a people moving with a purposeful, peaceful grace. Our journey began in violence and fear, born from a terrible regret, but it does not have to end there. The main screen then shifted to show Kine himself, standing on the bridge of his magnificent ship. He looked older, wiser, the fierce intensity in his eyes tempered by a profound, settled peace. The universe is vast, and it holds wonders and dangers we have only begun to glimpse. We did not return to reclaim a past or to threaten a future. We returned to offer our strength to the species that gave us life. We offer our protection, our technology, and our friendship to those who once had every reason to fear us. Aris was already on his way to the main landing field, designated just outside the Accord headquarters, his heart pounding not with fear but with a staggering, overwhelming sense of closure. The ramp of Kine's ship descended, and the hybrid leader walked down, not surrounded by guards but alone. He was taller, more imposing than ever, but his posture was open, his hands held away from his body in a gesture of profound peace. Aris walked out to meet him, an old man in a simple lab coat facing the living culmination of his life's most terrible and triumphant work. They stood for a moment, the scientist and his creation, the victim and the redeemed, looking at each other without a word. The entire planet watched. Then Aris simply smiled, a tired, genuine smile that reached his eyes and extended his hand. Kine looked at the human gesture, a symbol so simple yet so deeply coded with meaning, and after a heartbeat he reached out and took it. His grasp was firm, careful, immensely powerful yet infinitely gentle. It was not a handshake between two leaders. It was the closing of a circle so vast it encompassed abductions and alliances, terror and forgiveness, the depths of regret and the soaring heights of redemption. In that silent, powerful grip, they acknowledged the entire brutal, beautiful journey. The hybrids had not come to conquer or to be forgiven. They had come home as equals, and in doing so, they completed the story, proving that even the most catastrophic of mistakes can, against all odds, lead to a future no one could have ever dreamed. As Earth and its new allies charted the stars with a newfound sense of purpose, Dr. Aris Thorne found himself standing before a new generation of students and scientists in a gleaming orbital university. The viewport behind him framed a breathtaking panorama of a repaired Earth, its blue oceans and green continents now crisscrossed by the gentle, glowing paths of friendly ships. He looked out at the diverse faces before him, human, alien, and beings from newly contacted worlds, all united by a shared, harrowing history that had become their greatest lesson. They came for us with a single, arrogant goal, he began, his voice calm but carrying the weight of lived experience. They believed our value was locked away in our genetic code, a set of instructions they could extract, refine, and own. They saw our aggression, our resilience, our fierce love for our own. They saw the fire in our hearts, and they mistook it for a simple tool they could add to their own arsenal. A faint, knowing smile touched his lips. They wanted our DNA, and now they profoundly regret it. But then his tone shifted, becoming warmer, filled with a generosity of spirit that had been hard-won. And yet, we owe them an immense, if unintended, debt of thanks. Their catastrophic error became the catalyst for everything we have built together. In their quest to take a piece of us, they accidentally gave us the one thing we could never have built on our own, a true and lasting unity. He gestured to the mixed audience, to the collaboration happening in labs and shipyards across the solar system. They forced us to look past our own planet, our own species, and recognize that the only way to survive in a vast and often dangerous cosmos is through understanding and cooperation. They showed us the darkest possible outcome of selfishness, and in doing so, they illuminated the only path forward. The story, he concluded, was far from over. It was not an ending, but a magnificent new beginning. The closing chapter was not a final period, but an ellipsis hanging in the starlight, a promise of endless possibilities. The human spirit, once nearly extinguished by a cold and clinical hunger, had not only endured but had expanded, reaching out to embrace other forms of life and intelligence. Our cosmic journey was no longer a solitary trek into the unknown. It was now a shared voyage, a symphony of different voices and experiences traveling together into a future filled with wonder, discovery, and the unwavering promise that from even the deepest regret, the most beautiful redemption can grow. The next chapter is waiting to be written, not with weapons or genetic harvesters, but with curiosity, compassion, and the unshakable belief that our greatest strength was never in our DNA alone, but in our limitless capacity to connect.